Welcome, my friends, to Old City Cemetery in Jacksonville, Florida. One of the oldest, if not the oldest, established cemetery in Jacksonville proper. Here on the corner of Union and Catherine, this cemetery was the cemetery for the city of Jacksonville for many of its more early formulative years. And as I understand it, it still contains a surprise or two. So join us today, if you will, from Old City Cemetery in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida, as we do just a little exploring. Here we are in our second cemetery, although one could actually refer to it as the first cemetery in Jacksonville, as this was the official city cemetery for many of the formulative years in Jacksonville. I give you Old City Cemetery, Jacksonville, Florida. This particular cemetery was established in 1852, although I understand the grounds actually had several burials well before that time. So I do have to say, the tombstones here are going to be in various states of, well, sometimes maintenance, sometimes unfortunately decay. Just want to warn everybody going into that there may be some triggers. I mean, right over here we could see a small plot that's got tombstones going back to the mid-19th century. Actually quite a few around the front end fall into that category. But there are some newer ones as well. We'll get to that. It's always a little sad that you see signs like this: police patrolled, respect the dead. Honestly, I've said this before in several videos, I believe cemeteries are beautiful places. It's a great place to learn the history of an area. It's a great place to show respect for the history of that area, and this cemetery certainly has a lot of history. For those of you who have not been in one of my cemetery videos before, I have a rule, and that rule is that I will try to go out of my way not to show the names on tombstones unless they are of what you might call notable figures, historical figures, celebrities, things like that, that are more in the public awareness anyways. Specifically, I try not to show the names of anyone who may be more recently deceased, because of course their loved ones, I'm sure, are still around and would prefer the privacy. Likewise with my cemetery videos, you'll find that in a lot of my videos I tend to be a little bit more lighthearted. I tend to be a lot more serious in my cemetery videos. This is a serious matter, and really we're not here for entertainment so much as we are for education. And as you can see, some of the tombstones here and the slabs are not in the best of shape. We got one tipped over there, obviously. We have this one right here, which is cracked and unreadable. But I would like to point out this very beautiful ornate wrought iron gate that they've placed around this particular plot. Looks like corn, actually. I'm not entirely sure what that signifies, but if you know, by all means, please leave it in the comments. I would love to know. Being a city cemetery, the city is theoretically somewhat responsible for the maintenance of this cemetery. Unfortunately, that also means that the cemeteries don't always receive the amount of care that one would expect and that one would see from a more private burial ground. That being said, as we go through here today, there's certain areas we're going to have to avoid because they're more treacherous. As I understand, there's some ground that will give way. There are some areas that are a little bit more dangerous. I will try to show some of these areas to you, but I'm certainly not going to get into those areas. As you can see here, this particular gate has fallen. I don't know if that is something that tipped over on its own or if it was pushed over. There are some military tombstones here. I should point out that there is a large group of Confederate soldiers that are buried in the cemetery, as well as there are a large group of what they called the colored soldiers from the Union Army. These days, we certainly would not refer to them that way, but As we go through, we're probably going to see some of this. Looks like there is a tombstone that looks like a lamb over there. That usually would signify a child. Also like to point out that this particular wall here is made largely of seashells, as you can probably see, which was certainly one of the more popular building styles at the time. Here in Florida, the ground is very sandy and very shallow, so there really wasn't a whole lot of stone or clay used in the cemeteries, especially early on. Now, as time has gone by, it could be imported, that's a different story, but when they started off, there were a lot of wood tombstones, and there was a lot of using what they had to build, ergo, the seashells. As you can see, these tombstones have been roped off, most likely for safety reasons, and we're certainly not going to get any closer than this. Kind of an interesting note, this area around the cemetery itself, there are some churches nearby, but it is a fairly residential area in the middle of downtown, but definitely an older neighborhood. As you can see behind me, there are several buildings. Some of them are being reclaimed at the moment. There's a lot of construction going on. It looks like they're trying to bring this area back. It is certainly, I wouldn't call it a bad area by any means, but you can tell that it has been fairly economically depressed, and it looks like they are trying to pull this area out of that, and for better or worse, that will probably bring some more attention to the cemetery. I'm seeing a lot of smaller tombstones that are for children, and that is always very sad, especially when you consider the child mortality rate back in the 1800s. Case in point, this tombstone over here, this is an infant, and as you can see on top of it, they've got, again, what I believe is a lamb. Also worth noting, there's a lot of tombstones that are kind of off by themselves. As you can see over here, some of the older ones. Sometimes, and I'm not saying that is necessarily the case here, but sometimes when you go to these older cemeteries and you see a tombstone off by themselves, it's not because they were actually buried off by themselves. It's because some of the other graves nearby have lost their markers. So keep that in mind when you are walking in especially in a historical cemetery. Now here is something a little bit more of note, especially to people who are, like me, Gen Xers. As you see here, Nathan G. and Alice B. Nunn, as well as Alice Elizabeth Nunn, born in 1927, passed away July 1st, 1988. Alice Nunn, if you are not familiar with that particular name, Alice was an actress of some notoriety. You might know her, as I do, as the actress who portrayed Large Marge in Pee-wee's Big Adventure in the 80s. Now, this is kind of a big deal for me and for, quite frankly, a lot of people I know, especially those of us who were raised in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, probably even those younger. Large Marge was only in the movie Pee-wee's Big Adventure for a few minutes, but she had a very noted effect on a lot of us. Not only was her part absolutely hilarious looking back on it, and she did a fantastic job in the role, but at the time, most of us who were younger found the role to be absolutely terrifying, to the point where, for some of us, myself included, it became and remained one of the central images that has sort of stuck with us. Out of all the movies that are out there, it is one of the images that has stuck with so many of us all these years later. Now, Alice is buried here underneath this tree. If you would like to visit and pay your respects, and I certainly would like to pay my respects, she is, I would call it, maybe about 100 yards in from the main gate, and then to your left by about 50 yards. One other thing I think I should point out, if you do come in here, it is Florida. and as I film this, it is very late in July. It is probably about 4 o'clock right now, a little bit before 4 o'clock, and the mosquitoes and the flies are definitely voraciously biting me. You'll see me swatting at myself as I talk. If you come to Florida cemeteries, you had better be prepared to be chewed on by the bugs who really do like to call these areas home. I've always loved coming into these older cemeteries and watching how the traditions, the stone cutting, the practices change as the years go by. You'll see some tombstones that are more standard, obviously, and then some that will just absolutely blow your mind. Like over here, it looks like it could be a bench, it looks like it could be a table. I'm not really sure what you would call that. I've not seen one specifically like that before, but it's very cool, and it certainly stands out. Right over here, William A. McLean passed away on August 22nd, 1898. Past Grand Master, Sovereign Grand Inspector General, erected by the Grand Lodge of Florida, ancient accepted Scottish rite. Actually, this area over here seems to have quite a few people who were Masons. A lot of tombstones with the stonemasons logo. And actually, I kind of want to point out over here this very elaborate anchor tombstone that I've been seeing from across the cemetery because it's so large. Very cool, very unusual. There's a tombstone over there that just says, "One of Captain Dickinson's gallant command." And I can't help but wonder, without any more of the story, if that is someone whose identity was not discovered before being laid to rest. Another very elaborate Mason tombstone. Now, I believe this is actually still an active cemetery, especially in certain areas. As you can see, there's actually there's a shelter up ahead that I believe you can use for post-funeral. This is easily one of the larger stones that I've seen, and actually, as you can see, there are quite a few other stones back here. There's this tree that is unfortunately growing through some of the tombstones and the graves. Some of these that go back to, again, the 19th century. Now, these days, I'm not sure what you can do about it. It's obviously gone too far. Likewise, as you can see, some of these tombstones and these plots are very overgrown. Over here, you can see one of the wrought iron fences, and it has been very much bent in. It looks like something very heavy has been putting its weight down on it. Obviously, there's trees here, but who knows? Over here, CSA, I believe this is the Confederate area of the cemetery. As you can see, this area seems to be very, very well maintained. I'm guessing most likely by the Daughters of the Confederacy, who I believe are still active in the area, although I don't believe they are what they once were. And again, I should point out, as I walk through these cemeteries and I look into them and I explore the history behind them, I don't go into it specifically with opinions of what they did in life pushing me towards it. There are a lot of cemeteries I go into that have people who did things and followed philosophies that I very much disagree with. But that being said, I still go in because there is still a lot of history behind them, and I do believe that it's a good thing to know what happened in many cases so that we could avoid having it happen again. Okay, so right over here, and you can see they got a smile, you're on camera. I don't know if that's actually true. I don't see any cameras around here. But regardless, it is the old Confederate Soldiers and Sailors Home, 1893 to 1938. This is Confederate Plot Section 6. It's final resting place for the Confederate veterans who resided at the Old Soldiers and Sailors Home, a refuge for aged and disabled veterans. So that is what this area is. And yes, it does say right here that the Daughters of the Confederacy are the ones who generally keep up with this area. And truthfully, as much as I think that's a good thing and it's beautiful what they've done, I really wish we saw similar care to a lot of these other areas. I see the camera they're talking about. It's right over there. United Daughters of the Confederacy, United Confederate Veterans, Sons of the Confederate Veterans. Again, it's the South. So you're going to see a lot more Confederate than you are Union. That is just part of the history of the area. I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. So, I grew up in the cemeteries where the Union soldiers were buried. I will say this: I didn't see the same level of care up north that I see down here for Civil War soldiers. That's not a judgment statement. It just is what it is. Henry J. Bradley, Fireman Duval Hose Company, killed in the line of duty December 16, 1885. His death contributed to the creation of a professional paid Jacksonville Fire Department. That is inspiring, actually. Wow. Looks like the tombstone has certainly been replaced since 1885 and very well kept, as well it should be. This certainly isn't the largest cemetery that I've been to. As you can see, we have the back end of the cemetery right over there, and turning this direction, we're maybe about 250 yards in from the front gate, and we are probably about 100 yards away from the back gate. And there are fences on both sides that are separating us from, again, more residential areas. Yeah, more toppled and somewhat obscured tombstones. Here's another type of burial that I'm not overly familiar with. But it looks like they've got a few of these here. I mean, you can tell from the shape what is happening here. I'm not sure I've seen this in practice before. Also, as you can see, this tombstone here, which has been washed away, has been placed against this oak. Unfortunately, these oaks, while they are beautiful, often have the effect of knocking over the tombstones as their roots are very destructive. For those of you that own a home, you are probably well aware of that fact. As we travel to the back, there are still a lot of older tombstones, but I'm also noticing some of the somewhat newer tombstones popping up too. Thus far, I don't think I've seen anything that is newer than late 80s. I'm sure there could be. I'm not looking at all of the dates, but that's just what I've seen so far. Here we have a broken tombstone. I don't see where the rest of the tombstone is, unfortunately. This is some of the older stuff in the back. As you can see, there's a lot of things that have been toppled over and just kind of washed away with time. Okay, so there's a mausoleum back here for Princess Laura Adorka Kofi, Mother Kofi, martyred African princess, GA tribe, Asofa, Ghana, Gold Coast, West Africa. Princess sent by the Most High, assassinated in the pulpit, March 8th, 1928, Miami, Florida. So that is actually the founder of the African Universal Church. Right in here. They are definitely still coming to pay their respect to Mother Kofi. A lot of broken down bricks in this area out here in the back. Something kind of interesting over here in the back wall. There's looks like an old television set, a lamp, and a lampshade with plants growing through it, placed against the back wall. When I say an old television set, I mean an old television set, probably, from the look of things, late 90s, early 2000s. It destroys me to call that an old television set, but doing the math, this particular burial, 1952, has been, as you can see, kind of shattered. Thankfully, it doesn't go all the way down. And from Old City Cemetery here in Jacksonville, Florida, I believe that is about going to do it for us today. If you haven't done so already, I sure would appreciate if you would reach down below, give it a big like if you are into this type of content. Give it a big subscribe. If you're new here, we do historical locations, we do tourist attractions, small town travel, cruises, and well, we try to give you a lot of infotainment. Usually, if they're not cemetery videos, they're a little bit more lighthearted. But I want to thank you for being here today. We'll see you next time when we do just a little more exploring.